Thanks. So I suppose the talk I'm going to give today is about the medium combustion plant regulations. And we've heard of a lot of different sources today of different pollutants. I suppose point source ones that you might get from your solid fuel burning, and then the ones from transport, etc. And we also think sometimes as well of sources that might come from industry. But they're usually typically covered under large combustion plant regulations and under our licensing. So this really relates to the middle guys, the guys that are kind of the medium-sized combustion plants. And there's a little bit of, I suppose, a lack of knowledge out there at the moment about what regulations apply to who at the moment. So that's what I'm aiming to look at in this talk, is just to give an overview of the regs and to show who they apply to and what your obligations are under the regulations. So the Medium Combustion Plant Directive itself came into play in December 2015 and then transposed into Irish law under SI 595 of 2017. So they cover plants that are between 1 megawatt and 50 megawatt thermal input. So they cover boilers, engines and turbines, and then have some exclusions for things like LCP with kilns, propulsion, crematoria and offshore platforms. But they cover a wide variety of fuels. So biomass, other solid fuels, gas oil, liquid fuels, natural gas and other gases. So the aim of the regulations, again, is to reduce SOx, NOx and dust emissions from combustion plants. And then the emission limit values then are risk-based, based on the technology and the thermal rating and the fuel type of whichever MCP it relates to. So just while I'm going through this talk, I'm going to use a lot of terms that kind of relate to new and existing MCPs. So when I refer to a new MCP, we're talking about anything that started being operational after the 20th of December 2018. Existing then would be operational before that date. And it's important to know those because the requirements of the regs depends on when they were came into force. So anything over 50 megawatts thermal input then will fall under LCP, and medium combustion plant directive then covers anything from 1 megawatt up to 50. So who might operate them? And I think there is a bit of a lack of awareness out there that could be a huge amount of people that could be operating them. So we have anything with a large central heating system is potentially going to be covered by the regulations. So hospitals, schools, universities, office blocks, apartment blocks with central heating systems, large mobile generators, anywhere else where there's large shopping centres, airports. So anywhere where you're going to need a large amount of heating space, or factories that aren't already covered, let's say under Industrial Emissions Directive classes under licences. So this is going to be, from here on in, this is going to be a bit of a choose your own adventure for MCPs, because what I've tried to do is break down the regulations into a bit of a flow chart, because it's very hard to decide what actually applies to you. So basically, if you have a boiler, if you don't have a boiler over 1 megawatt, you're not in. You can just relax now. You're not in this. This is not for you. So if you are above 1 megawatt thermal input, then you are potentially need to register. And that depends on whether you're an existing or a new MCP. So if you're below 5 megawatts, but you were first operational after 2012 or the 20th of 12, 2018, then you must be registered, okay, as of now. If you have one that's less or greater than 1 but less than 5, you don't need to register yet if it was operational before that date, but you will be required to register by the 1st of November 2028. So how do you register if you have to register? So there is a registration application through the Eden portal, and you can get that on our website. It basically, you have to provide all the information. So the information that's required is set out in Schedule 1 of the regs, but it's obviously in the application form as well for the MCPs. You'll be then, if you're registered, given a unique certificate of registration number, which starts with M0 and then the registration number on it. This is just showing you the list of some of our registered ones, and that's an example of the certificate of registration that would be issued to anybody who's an MCP holder. So once you're registered then, what are your obligations? So You have to carry out representative monitoring as required under the regs, and I will describe that a little bit more because it depends on what type of MCP and the age and the size of it, what you have to do. You have to comply with the emission limit values, but only where they apply, again, depending on your operational hours and type. You have to maintain records and your monitoring results, record your fuel use and a log of your operational hours. And if there are any non-compliances, you're required to notify the EPA. So, back to my flowcharts. So, a lot of this is risk-based in terms of how often is your MCP going to be operational. So, if they're operational less than 500 hours, obviously there's less of a risk, you're not going to be emitting as much potentially polluting material. So, if your MCP is operational less than 500 hours per annum, then you go down this part of the chart. If it's not using solid fuel, then you don't have any ELVs, okay? So that's only if you're less than 500 hours and not using solid fuel. If you're using solid fuel, regardless of the amount of hours you're running, you will have ELVs for dust, and that will be dependent on the age of your MCP. So if your MCP is one of the new ones, as in after 2018, then your limit will be 100. If it's existing, it's 200. So basically, for these ones here now, if you're over 500 hours, we're going to the next flowchart. So, here we go. Okay, so for existing ones, a lot of the conditions that kick in will kick in later. So for existing MCPs that are greater than 1 but less than 5, so that's excluding engines and turbines, which have different limits. I've just given this, I won't read it all out because it's something you can go back to if you want to have a look at it, but the different schedules apply to you depending on your fuel input. If you're existing and you're greater than 5, then you will have other ELVs that apply to you, and those dates will vary as well. Again, it's seen that the larger MCPs may potentially be a greater risk, therefore the ELVs are coming in sooner than the ones that are for the smaller MCPs. Existing MCPs and turbines have different limits as well, and they're the dates that they're going to be in, and again, varies by fuel input. So that's just an example of one of the tables from the schedules, and you can see here that it will depend on what fuel type that you're using in your particular MCP. So for new ones then, so anything that was installed and operational after 2018, your ELVs then, if you're operating over 500 hours, will be set out in those schedules. And that's another just example of them there. So there's a lot to read in the regs if you need to go through them, but that will just show you that you have different ones. So for solid biomass, you're going to have 300 for NOx. For gas oil, you're down to 200. And dust, obviously, for gas-fired MCPs, you don't have the dust limit, so depending on your fuel type. So then the monitoring requirements themselves. So again, this is supposed to be kind of like a risk-based approach. So if you are not operating that often, you don't have to monitor as often. So if you're operating more than 500 hours, if you're operating for more than 500 hours, then it depends on the size of your MCP. So if it's less than 20 megawatts, you have to monitor every 3 years. If it's greater, you have to monitor every year. If your MCP is less than 20 megawatts, but you operate for you operate for less than 500 hours a year, then that really depends then on your maximum average operating hours. So for those that are less than 20 megawatts, you have to do it by 3 times the maximum average annual operating hours, but at least every 5 years, whichever is, like if 3 times the maximum average operating hours turns out to be greater than 5 years, you still have to do the 5 years. It doesn't matter. It's always the 5 years. Okay. So monitoring requirements then. So again, we need them to be representative. So they have to be representative of the emissions. And again, that will then usually exclude startup or shutdown. And they must have representative monitoring locations. They must have safe and permanent access to get to those monitoring locations. So for further information on that, we do have a guidance document, AG11, which is a guidance note on the monitoring of stack emissions monitoring from medium combustion plants, which you can get from our website. in relation to monitoring then, we do require accredited monitoring, so that'd be 17025, accredited monitoring for MCPs greater than 5 megawatts. We don't require accredited monitoring for those lower than that, but they should follow the methods where possible. So the monitoring has to be carried out for NOx, SOx and dust, depending on your fuel type. Obviously the gas ones, you don't have to do dust, but CO is required for all MCPs. So just to where you can find out more, general information on MCPs are at the list there at our website. And for more guidance again on MCPs, you can go to our AG11. So there's two teams that will look after MCPs. One is for the registration of MCPs, so you can address your queries to the MCP registration team at that email address. But anything to do with the enforcement or monitoring requirements, you can send them to our team and we'll try to answer your questions for you. So the key takeaways for anybody who's wondering whether they need to register is to really check the thermal input of your MCP and then follow them with their handy flow charts there and just see if you're in or out. So it's just to see if you need to register, and then after that you'll have to see what specific obligations that you have, and to be aware of the changing dates and be aware that you mightn't have to register now, but you will in the future. So keep an eye on those dates; they come up quicker than you think. Thank you. That's it.